Ambassador Thomas Kane stepped through the towering crystalline archway and into the most intimidating chamber in the known galaxy. The great council hall stretched before him like a cathedral of power, its bioluminescent walls pulsing with alien energies that had witnessed the birth and death of 1,000 civilizations. Above him, the dome opened to reveal the starfield beyond, where hundreds of warships from dozens of species waited in ominous formation. The chamber itself defied human comprehension. Tiered platforms rose in concentric circles, each one occupied by representatives of species that commanded star systems, controlled trade routes, and decided the fate of entire worlds. At the center of it all sat the High Tribunal, 7 beings whose authority stretched across the galaxy's spiral arms. Thomas walked alone down the gleaming pathway toward the defendant's platform, his simple Earth-made diplomatic uniform a stark contrast to the ornate robes, biomechanical enhancements, and crystalline forms surrounding him. Every step echoed in the vast space, and he could feel hundreds of alien eyes tracking his movement. Some showed curiosity, others contempt, but most displayed the cold indifference of predators examining prey. The silence was broken by a voice that seemed to come from the very walls themselves. High Chancellor Vexnari, a towering figure whose serpentine body coiled behind the central podium, spoke with the authority of ages. Her species had been ruling galactic politics when Earth was still believing the sun revolved around it. The human delegate will approach the circle of judgment, she intoned. Her words automatically translated into every language spoken in the chamber. You stand accused of violating the neutral zone accords, establishing unauthorized military installations, and disrupting trade corridors that have maintained galactic stability for millennia. Thomas reached the defendant's platform and looked up at the assembled powers. The Hegemony War Council sat to his left, their battle-scarred forms radiating barely contained aggression. To his right, the Trade Federation's insectoid representatives clicked and chittered among themselves, calculating profit margins on human subjugation. Behind them, dozens of other species watched with varying degrees of interest and hostility. Furthermore, High Chancellor Vexnari continued, humanity has demonstrated a disturbing pattern of expansion beyond the territorial limits established for newly inducted species. The evidence of your transgression is overwhelming. The chamber's holographic displays came alive, showing star charts marked with human colonies, defensive installations, and patrol routes. To the untrained eye, it appeared damning. Earth's settlements had indeed spread far beyond what most species achieved in their first century of galactic citizenship. The Council's judgment is clear, Vexnari announced, her ancient voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Humanity must immediately withdraw all military assets from disputed territories, pay reparations equivalent to 200 billion galactic credits, and accept Council oversight of all future expansion efforts. A murmur of satisfaction rippled through the chamber. Several alien representatives leaned forward, already calculating how they would divide up the resources of a humbled Earth. The Gorlak military combine seemed particularly pleased, their massive forms shifting with anticipation. But Thomas Kane simply stood there completely calm, with what might have been a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. High Chancellor, he said quietly, his voice somehow carrying clearly through the vast chamber despite its modest volume. I believe there's been a fundamental misunderstanding. The reaction was immediate and electric. No species had ever interrupted a formal council judgment. The very concept was unthinkable. Representatives began speaking in urgent whispers, translators working overtime to process the shock rippling through dozens of languages. General Thrackmore of the Gorlak Combine rose from his seat, his 7-foot frame bristling with barely contained fury. The human dares to speak out of turn. This proves their barbaric nature. Does it? Thomas asked, his tone remaining conversational. Or does it simply prove that we approach diplomacy differently than you expect? He reached into his jacket with deliberate slowness, every movement watched by hundreds of beings. Security systems throughout the chamber hummed to life, weapons trained on the lone human figure. But Thomas appeared completely unconcerned by the firepower pointed in his direction. From his jacket, he withdrew what appeared to be a simple data pad, primitive by galactic standards. The device looked like something a human child might use for homework. Certainly nothing that could threaten the most secure facility in the galaxy. You see, Thomas continued, holding up the device, the misunderstanding isn't about our territorial expansion. It's about which conversation we're actually having here today. The datapad pulsed once with a soft blue light. Instantly, every weapon system in the chamber went dark. Security fields flickered and died. The mighty shields protecting the Council's most important facility simply vanished as if they had never existed. The silence that followed was absolute. High Chancellor Vexnari stared down at the human delegate, her serpentine features frozen in the first genuine shock she had experienced in 3 centuries of rule. "Impossible," she whispered. "Our security systems are quantum encrypted, completely isolated from external networks." They were, Thomas agreed pleasantly. Right up until 18 months ago, when we helped design the upgraded encryption protocols. Amazing what you can accomplish when everyone assumes you're technologically primitive. The implications hit the chamber like a physical blow. If humanity could disable the Council's defenses this easily, what else might they be capable of? Representatives began demanding explanations. Accusations flew between different factions, and the carefully maintained order of galactic politics began to crack. "Now then," Thomas said, his voice cutting through the chaos with surprising authority, "perhaps we should discuss what this negotiation is really about." The holographic displays around the chamber flickered and changed, now showing data that should have been impossible for any human to possess. Fleet movements, communication intercepts, strategic planning documents from a dozen different species. Information that revealed the true purpose of this gathering. Operation Dominion, Thomas announced, naming the secret military plan that was supposed to remain classified at the highest levels. The coordinated effort to reduce humanity to a client state. The division of our colonies among council members. The detailed plans for occupation and resource extraction. More displays appeared, showing the vast armada assembled in nearby systems. This wasn't a judicial hearing at all. It was meant to be a surrender ceremony, with Earth's representative accepting subjugation on behalf of his entire species. But something had gone terribly wrong with their calculations. You came here expecting to negotiate with a primitive species that stumbled into galactic civilization by accident, Thomas continued, his calm demeanor becoming more unsettling with each passing moment. Instead, you're about to learn why Earth has a very particular reputation when it comes to learning from our mistakes. High Chancellor Vexnari's ancient mind raced, trying to understand how their perfect plan had been compromised. How could you possibly have known about classified council operations? Thomas's smile became sharper, more predatory. The same way we knew about the hegemony's backup fleets, the Trade Federation's asset seizure plans, and the exact location of every ship you've assembled for this little demonstration. Around the chamber, representatives began receiving urgent communications from their fleets. Systems failures, navigation errors, communication blackouts. The mighty armada that was supposed to guarantee humanity's submission was experiencing problems that defied explanation. "Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished beings of all classifications," Thomas said, his voice now carrying the quiet confidence of someone holding all the cards, "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about the future of galactic civilization. The age of human submission," he realized with growing certainty, was about to end before it had truly begun. 3 hours before Ambassador Thomas Kane stepped into the council chamber, Admiral Rebecca Torres stood on the bridge of the Earth defense ship Vigilant, watching as the final pieces of humanity's greatest gamble fell into place. The view screen showed the assembled might of the Galactic Council, over 300 ships from dozens of species, enough firepower to reduce entire star systems to cosmic dust. "Admiral," called her communications officer, Lieutenant David Park, "we're receiving the Council's final ultimatum. They're demanding unconditional surrender within 6 hours. Rebecca nodded, her expression calm despite the magnitude of what they faced. Around her, the bridge crew worked with the quiet efficiency of professionals who had trained for this moment their entire careers. But none of them, except Rebecca herself, knew the full scope of what humanity had been preparing for the past 37 years. "Lieutenant Park," she said, "patch me through to all fleet commanders. Priority Alpha authorization." "Yes, ma'am." All commanders standing by. The main screen split to show the faces of humanity's other fleet leaders. Captain Elena Rodriguez commanded the stealth reconnaissance fleet. Captain Michael Chen led the deep space defense platforms. Captain Sarah Okafor controlled the civilian evacuation protocols. Each face showed the same determination that had carried humanity through its darkest hours. Ladies and gentlemen, Rebecca began, the moment we've been preparing for has arrived. The Council believes they're about to receive Earth's surrender. Instead, they're about to discover what humanity has become. She gestured to her tactical officer, who began uploading classified data to each ship, star charts showing hidden installations, communication networks that bypassed all known detection methods, and weapon systems that officially didn't exist. 37 years ago, Rebecca continued, when the last occupation forces withdrew from Earth, our predecessors made a solemn vow. Never again would humanity be caught defenseless. Never again would we be forced to accept subjugation simply because we lacked the knowledge to resist. The uploaded data revealed the true extent of human preparation. What appeared to be simple mining operations were actually sophisticated listening posts. Civilian trade routes concealed military supply lines. Research stations scattered throughout human space formed nodes of a defensive network that spanned dozens of light years. Captain Rodriguez, Rebecca addressed the reconnaissance commander. Status report on the Shadow Fleet. All stealth vessels are in position, Admiral. We have eyes on every Council formation. They have no idea we've been tracking their movements for months. Excellent. Captain Chen, what's the status of our defensive platforms? All systems are green, Admiral. The platforms are maintaining their mining operation camouflage, but they can switch to combat configuration in under 90 seconds. Rebecca felt a surge of pride in her species. While the great galactic powers had grown complacent in their dominance, humanity had been busy learning, adapting, and preparing. They had studied every Council species, analyzed their technologies, and identified their weaknesses. Captain Okafor, civilian evacuation status. All non-essential personnel have been relocated to secure facilities. We're ready to implement full emergency protocols if necessary. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Rebecca said. But if the Council forces our hand, we'll show them exactly what Earth is capable of. The truth was, humanity's apparent technological inferiority had been carefully cultivated. While Council species focused on individual advancement and factional politics, humans had been quietly building something unprecedented, a truly unified planetary defense strategy. Admiral, Lieutenant Park interrupted, we're receiving a transmission from Ambassador Kane. He's requesting confirmation of Phase 1 readiness. Tell him we're green across all boards, Rebecca replied. And patch me through to the research division. A new face appeared on the screen. Dr. James Liu, humanity's chief xenotechnology specialist. His background in alien systems analysis had made him invaluable in preparing for this confrontation. Doctor, are our technical surprises ready for deployment? More than ready, Admiral. The Council's overconfidence in their security systems has been their greatest weakness. We've had access to their communication networks for years. The implications were staggering. While the galactic powers had been planning humanity's subjugation, humans had been listening to every word. They knew about Operation Dominion before some Council members did. They had detailed intelligence on fleet compositions, strategic objectives, and internal political divisions. How long have we been monitoring their communications? Rebecca asked. Consistently for the past 18 months, Admiral, but we've had intermittent access for much longer. The breakthrough came when we realized that their quantum encryption was based on mathematical principles we helped them refine. It was a perfect irony. In their arrogance, the Council had sought human assistance with their most challenging technical problems, never imagining that the primitive species they looked down upon might be learning from every interaction. Dr. Liu, are you confident in our countermeasures? Absolutely, Admiral. We've identified critical vulnerabilities in every major ship class they've deployed. Their weapon systems, navigation computers, even their life support, we can disrupt any of it remotely. Rebecca nodded, though she hoped it wouldn't come to that. Humanity preferred to win through intelligence and preparation rather than brute force. But if the Council forced a military confrontation, they would discover that Earth had spent decades preparing for exactly that scenario. Admiral, her tactical officer called out, long-range sensors are detecting movement in the outer system. It appears to be another Council fleet of 47 additional ships. Expected? Rebecca replied calmly. They want to ensure overwhelming superiority. What they don't realize is that every ship they bring gives us more targets to demonstrate our capabilities on. She turned back to the communications array. All commanders prepare for Phase 2 implementation. Dr. Liu, activate the technical demonstration protocols. It's time to show the Council that their intelligence estimates were somewhat optimistic. Around human space, systems that had remained dormant for years began coming online. Sensor networks revealed their true capabilities. Communication arrays dropped their civilian disguises. And deep in hidden facilities, weapons that incorporated principles the Council had never encountered began their final preparations. "Admiral Torres," came a new voice from the communication system. It was Colonel Martinez from Earth Command. "Ground-based installations report ready status. All planetary defense grids are operational." "Understood, Colonel. Maintain defensive posture unless directly threatened." Rebecca looked out at the assembled Council fleets, their ships gleaming with the confidence of technological superiority. They had come here expecting to dictate terms to a species they considered barely evolved beyond barbarism. Instead, they were about to learn that humanity's greatest strength had never been raw power or advanced technology. It was the ability to learn from defeat, to turn apparent weakness into hidden strength, and to prepare for challenges that others couldn't even imagine. "Lieutenant Park," she said, "open a channel to Ambassador Kane. Tell him the demonstration is ready to begin." As her communications officer relayed the message, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 37 years of careful planning, hidden development, and patient preparation. Humanity had learned hard lessons during the last occupation, and they had used every moment since then to ensure it would never happen again. "Admiral," Park reported, "message delivered. Ambassador Kane acknowledges and is proceeding with the diplomatic phase." "Excellent. Now we wait and watch as the Council discovers what Earth has really been doing all these years." In the depths of space, the greatest deception in galactic history was about to be revealed, and the species that had once conquered Earth was about to learn why humans never made the same mistake twice. The silence in the Council chamber stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Ambassador Thomas Kane stood calmly in the center of the Great Hall, the simple datapad in his hand having just demonstrated that humanity's technological capabilities were far beyond anything the galactic powers had imagined. Around him, representatives of dozens of species struggled to comprehend how their most secure facility had been compromised so easily. High Chancellor Vex Nari was the first to recover, her serpentine grace returning despite the shock that had frozen her ancient features. "Impressive theatrics, human delegate. But sabotaging our security systems will only add to your species' crimes." "Will it?" Thomas asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "I'm afraid you'll need to be more specific about which crimes you're referring to." He began walking slowly around the defendant's platform, his movement casual but purposeful. Each step took him closer to different alien representatives, and several shifted uncomfortably as he approached. The casual confidence he displayed was unsettling to beings accustomed to complete control. "Are you perhaps referring to our defensive installations in the Centauri system?" Thomas continued, his tone conversational. "Because according to the Colonial Expansion Accord, Section 4, Subsection 7, any recognized species may establish defensive positions within their territorial boundaries." He paused, looking directly at General Thrackmore of the Gorlak Combine. "Territories that were officially ratified by this very council 22 months ago." The massive alien's armored features contorted with rage. "Those installations exceed defensive parameters by any reasonable measurement." "Do they?" Thomas asked pleasantly. "Or do they simply exceed what you expected us to be capable of building?" He touched another control on his datapad, and the chamber's holographic displays came alive with information that should have been impossible for any human to possess. Star charts showing classified military positions, communication logs revealing secret agreements between Council species, and detailed analysis of Operation Dominion that included meeting transcripts from sessions that had taken place just days earlier. "Perhaps we should discuss the real reason for today's gathering," Thomas said, his voice carrying easily through the vast space. "The coordination between 12 major species to position their fleets over the past 4 months. The classified communications about what your files refer to as the human problem. The detailed occupation plans that divide our colonies among Council members." High Chancellor Vexnari's composure cracked visibly. "How could you possibly have accessed classified Council communications?" "The same way we accessed the hegemony's battle plans," Thomas replied. "The same way we know about Admiral Krixaval's orders to prepare bombardment solutions for major Earth cities." The same way we know that this judicial hearing was never intended to be anything more than elaborate theater. The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives shouted denials and accusations while demanding explanations from their own security chiefs. But through it all, Thomas remained perfectly calm, waiting for the storm to subside. When quiet returned, it was the ethereal delegate, Counselor Lise Andra, who spoke first. Her translucent form shimmered with what might have been respect or fear. The humans have been monitoring our communications. Learning from them, Thomas corrected gently. You see, my species has a peculiar relationship with defeat. Most civilizations, when they lose a war, simply accept their new position in the galactic hierarchy. They adapt to being client states, satisfied with whatever autonomy their conquerors allow them. He walked closer to the central dais where the High Tribunal sat, their ancient faces showing confusion and growing alarm. But humans have this unusual characteristic. When we lose, we study why. We analyze our enemy's advantages and our own weaknesses. We learn from every mistake and prepare for the inevitable next encounter. Thomas gestured to the holographic displays, which now showed historical data from the previous human-alien conflict. The occupation, the resistance movements, the gradual withdrawal as maintaining control became too costly and complicated. 37 years ago, when your predecessor councils withdrew their occupation forces from Earth, you made a critical assumption. You believed we would remain grateful for our independence and never challenge galactic authority again. The displays shifted to show the true scope of human activities since then, not just the obvious colonies and trade routes, but hidden networks of cooperation with dozens of species that the Council had dismissed as irrelevant. What you failed to understand, Thomas continued, is that humans don't just remember defeats. We transform them into education. Every humiliation becomes a lesson. Every weakness becomes a target for improvement. He held up the datapad again and new information flooded the displays. Real-time positions of every Council fleet, detailed technical specifications of their weapon systems, and tactical analyses that revealed critical vulnerabilities in their formations. For 37 years, while you've been focused on maintaining your dominance over known threats, humanity has been quietly studying every aspect of galactic civilization. We've learned your languages, understood your technologies, and identified the structural weaknesses in your political systems. General Thrackmore slammed his armored fist against his seat. Impossible. No single species could have developed such comprehensive intelligence networks. You're absolutely right, Thomas agreed. No single species could have accomplished this alone, which is why humanity didn't work alone. The revelation hit the chamber like a physical blow. The displays now showed something that challenged the fundamental assumptions of galactic politics, extensive cooperation between humanity and dozens of smaller species that the Council had largely ignored. The Altarian research stations that supposedly study stellar phenomena, Thomas explained. The Vegan manufacturing facilities that claim to produce only civilian goods. The Rigel mining operations that extract far more than simple minerals. Each revelation was accompanied by detailed intelligence showing a vast network of cooperation that had been growing in the shadows for decades. Species that the great powers had dismissed as irrelevant had been quietly building something unprecedented. You built a shadow alliance, Counselor Lysandra said, her voice filled with something approaching wonder. All those minor species we considered beneath notice. We built a different model of galactic civilization, Thomas replied. One based on mutual benefit rather than imposed hierarchy. Cooperation rather than domination. Shared advancement rather than hoarded privilege. High Chancellor Vexnari stared down at him, her ancient mind grappling with implications that extended far beyond this single confrontation. The balance of power we've maintained for 2 millennia is obsolete, Thomas finished. The age of great powers dictating terms to everyone else is ending. Not through conquest or revolution, but through the simple recognition that cooperation produces better results than coercion. Around the chamber, representatives began receiving urgent communications from their fleets. Systems failures, navigation anomalies, communication disruptions. The mighty armadas that were supposed to guarantee quick victory were experiencing problems that their best engineers couldn't explain. This is impossible, the draconian representative hissed, her scaled features flushed with fury. The Council has maintained order for 2,000 years. Order built on fear and suppression, Thomas replied calmly. Tell me, Representative Calathes, when was the last time the Council actually prevented a war rather than simply deciding which side would be allowed to win? The question hung in the air like an accusation. The Council's version of peace was, Thomas knew, a carefully managed system of controlled conflict where the great powers decided which species would prosper and which would suffer based on political convenience. What do you want? High Chancellor Vexnari finally asked, her voice heavy with the weight of inevitable change. Thomas smiled, and for the first time it was an expression of hope rather than threat. What humanity has always wanted, the right to exist as equals rather than subjects, the freedom to build relationships based on respect rather than fear, the opportunity to contribute to galactic civilization on our own terms. The age of submission was ending, and Thomas Kane was about to explain exactly what would replace it. Admiral Rebecca Torres watched the tactical displays with grim satisfaction as reports flooded in from across the star system. The Council's mighty fleets, assembled to demonstrate overwhelming superiority, were discovering that their technological advantage was largely an illusion. "Admiral," Commander Park reported, his voice tight with controlled excitement, "Phase 2 implementation is complete. All Council formations are experiencing significant system malfunctions." "Specifics," Rebecca ordered, though she already knew what her officers would find. Navigation computers are receiving false data. Communication arrays are being jammed by signals they can't locate or counter. Weapon targeting systems are offline across multiple ship classes. Park paused, consulting his readings. "Admiral, their flagship is trying to coordinate a response, but their command and control networks are completely compromised." Rebecca nodded, unsurprised. For years, human engineers had been working on projects that the Council had requested, believing they were getting technical assistance from a primitive species. Instead, they had been teaching humanity the intricacies of their most advanced systems. "Captain Rodriguez, status of the stealth fleet? All ships remain undetected, Admiral. We have close-range sensor locks on every Council vessel. They're flying blind while we watch everything they do." It was a perfect reversal of the expected dynamic. The hunters had become the hunted, and they didn't even realize it yet. Rebecca allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before turning to more immediate concerns. "Dr. Liu," she addressed the xenotechnology specialist, "how long can we maintain these disruptions?" "Indefinitely, Admiral. We're not attacking their systems directly, We're exploiting fundamental design flaws that they can't fix without complete rebuilds. They'll need months to develop effective countermeasures." The implications were staggering. The Council had assembled the largest military force in recent galactic history, only to discover that their weapons were useless and their communications were compromised. It was technological warfare at its most sophisticated level. "Admiral Torres," came a new voice from the communication array. "Colonel Martinez from Earth's Planetary Defense Command. Ground installations are tracking massive energy buildups in several Council ships. They appear to be attempting to overload their systems to regain functionality." "Let them try," Rebecca replied. "Dr. Liu, what happens if they push their systems beyond normal parameters?" "Cascading failures, Admiral. Their safety protocols will shut down non-essential systems to prevent catastrophic damage. They'll lose even more functionality." Rebecca smiled grimly. The Council's technological superiority had become their greatest weakness. Their ships were so advanced, so interconnected, that disrupting key systems caused everything else to fail. Humanity's simpler, more robust designs would have been far more resilient. "Admiral," her communications officer announced, "we're receiving a transmission from Ambassador Kane. He's requesting military demonstration support for what he calls educational purposes." "Grant his request," Rebecca ordered. "It's time to show the Council exactly what they're dealing with." She activated the fleet-wide command network. "All ships, all stations, prepare for Phase 3 revelation. Drop all camouflage protocols. Activate full capability displays." Throughout human space, the true extent of Earth's defensive preparations began to reveal itself. What had appeared to be simple mining operations dropped their disguises to show massive weapons platforms. Civilian cargo ships deployed military-grade sensor arrays and defensive systems. Research stations revealed themselves as command and control nodes for networks that spanned multiple star systems. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Davis from the sensor station. "Admiral, our actual fleet strength is showing as over 400 vessels. I had no idea we had so many ships." Most of them have been operating under civilian covers, Rebecca explained. Freighters with hidden weapon systems, science vessels with military sensors, mining ships that can deploy defense platforms. We learned from the last war that obvious military preparations invite preemptive strikes. The tactical display updated to show humanity's true defensive capabilities. It was impressive enough to give even the overconfident council pause. But more importantly, it demonstrated something that the galactic powers had never encountered. A species that had learned to fight asymmetrically. Admiral, Commander Park reported, the council fleets are attempting to regroup. Several ships are trying to withdraw to safe distance. How are they managing that with their navigation systems compromised? They're using manual piloting and basic visual navigation. Slow and clumsy, but effective for simple movements. Rebecca considered the situation. The council had come here expecting a quick demonstration of power, followed by Earth's surrender. Instead, they were learning that humanity had spent decades preparing for exactly this confrontation. Open a channel to the council flagship, she ordered. Let's see if they're ready to listen to reason. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of the hegemony dreadnought dominance. Admiral Crixval, the Gorlak military commander, stared out at her with a mixture of rage and confusion. "Human Admiral," he growled. "Your interference with our systems constitutes an act of war." "Does it?" Rebecca asked mildly. "I thought this was a diplomatic meeting. Are you saying the council came here with hostile intent?" "We came here to enforce galactic law." "Whose law?" Rebecca inquired. "The council's authority derives from the consent of member species." "Did humanity consent to Operation Dominion? Did we agree to occupation and resource extraction?" Admiral Crixval's massive features contorted with frustration. "Primitive species don't get to negotiate with their superiors." "Primitive?" Rebecca smiled, and the expression was not entirely pleasant. "Admiral, take a look at your tactical displays. If they're still functioning, that is." She gestured to her own screens, which showed real-time positions of every council vessel. "We know the exact location of every ship in your fleet. We've disabled your weapons, compromised your communications, and neutralized your technological advantages. Does that sound primitive to you?" The Gorlak Admiral's eyes widened as he realized the full scope of his predicament. "How is this possible? Our intelligence reports showed that humanity had barely achieved faster-than-light travel." "Your intelligence was designed to show exactly what we wanted you to see," Rebecca replied. "While you were focused on obvious threats, we were building something you never expected to encounter, a truly united planetary defense." She activated additional displays, showing the scope of human cooperation with other species. "You see, Admiral, humanity learned something important from our last defeat. Individual strength matters less than collective intelligence. While you've been competing with each other for dominance, we've been building alliances based on mutual benefit." "This changes nothing," Crixval snarled. "We still have overwhelming numerical superiority." "Do you?" Rebecca asked. "Captain Chen, please show the Admiral our defensive positions." New contacts appeared on the tactical display, as hidden installations throughout the system revealed themselves. Weapon platforms that had been disguised as asteroids, defense stations concealed within gas giant atmospheres, and mobile units that had been running silent for months. "Admiral Crixval," Rebecca said quietly, "you came here with the largest fleet assembled in recent galactic history. But you're fighting in a system that humanity has been fortifying for 37 years. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and completely outmaneuvered." The silence on the Gorlak Bridge was deafening. For the first time in his military career, Admiral Crixval was facing an enemy that had planned more carefully, prepared more thoroughly, and understood the nature of the conflict better than he did. "What do you want?" he finally asked. "The same thing Ambassador Kane is explaining to your political leaders," Rebecca replied. "Recognition that the age of imposed dominance is over. It's time for a new model of galactic civilization." As she spoke, Rebecca knew that everything was about to change. The balance of power that had existed for millennia was crumbling, and humanity was about to show the galaxy what cooperation could accomplish. The council chamber had become a crucible where the old galactic order was being forged into something entirely new. Ambassador Thomas Kane stood at the center of the Great Hall, no longer a defendant but clearly the architect of a transformation that would reshape civilization across the galaxy. "High Chancellor Vexenari," Thomas said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who held all the strategic advantages. I believe it's time we discussed the real terms of this negotiation. The holographic displays surrounding the chamber now showed the true disposition of forces throughout the system. Where the Council had expected to see overwhelming superiority, they instead witnessed something that challenged their fundamental understanding of galactic politics. Humanity's apparent weakness had been a carefully constructed illusion, and the reality beneath it was formidable. "This is impossible," General Thrackmore growled, his massive frame trembling with rage and disbelief. "No single species could have developed such extensive capabilities without our knowledge." "You're absolutely correct," Thomas agreed pleasantly. "No single species could have accomplished this alone, which is why humanity didn't work in isolation." The displays shifted to reveal something that sent shockwaves through the assembled representatives. Communication networks, technological exchanges, and formal alliance agreements are all demonstrating that humanity had been quietly building relationships with dozens of species that the Council had dismissed as politically irrelevant. The Altarian Research Consortium that supposedly studies only theoretical physics, Thomas continued, walking slowly around the chamber's central area. The Vegan manufacturing cooperatives that claim to produce only civilian technology. The Centauri mining collectives that extract resources far beyond simple metals. Each revelation was accompanied by detailed intelligence that should have been impossible for humans to possess. Trade agreements that concealed technology transfers, research projects that developed military applications, and cooperation networks that had been growing in the shadows for decades. "You built a counter-alliance," Councillor Lysandra, the ethereal delegate, observed with something approaching admiration. "All those minor species we considered beneath serious attention." "We built a different vision of galactic civilization," Thomas corrected. "One based on partnership rather than domination, shared advancement rather than hoarded privilege, collective security rather than imposed order." High Chancellor Vexenari's serpentine form coiled tighter as she grappled with implications that extended far beyond this single confrontation. "The political structure we've maintained for 2 millennia is obsolete," Thomas finished with quiet finality. "The age of great powers dictating terms to everyone else is ending. Not through violence or revolution, but through the recognition that cooperation produces superior results to coercion." Around the chamber, representatives were receiving increasingly urgent communications from their fleets, systems failures that couldn't be repaired, navigation errors that couldn't be corrected, communication blackouts that grew worse with each attempt to restore them. The mighty armadas that were supposed to guarantee swift victory had become elaborate displays of technological helplessness. "This is unacceptable," the draconian representative hissed, her scaled features flushed with fury. "The Council has maintained galactic stability for countless generations." "Stability built on fear and suppression," Thomas replied calmly. "Tell me, Representative Calathes, when was the last time the Council actually prevented a conflict rather than simply choosing which side would be permitted to win?" The question struck at the heart of the Council's authority. Their version of peace was, everyone present knew, a carefully managed system of controlled warfare where the great powers decided outcomes based on political convenience rather than justice or necessity. "You speak of alternatives," High Chancellor Vexenari said, her ancient voice heavy with the weight of inevitable change. "What exactly are you proposing?" Thomas gestured to the holographic displays which now showed a different vision of galactic governance. Trade agreements that benefited all participants, research consortiums that shared discoveries freely, and defense pacts that protected smaller species rather than exploiting them. "The Galactic Cooperation Council," Thomas announced, "a governing body based on representation rather than dominance. Equal voices for all member species, regardless of their military strength or economic power. Decisions made through consensus rather than imposed through force." "Impossible," General Thrackmore declared. "Weaker species lack the wisdom to govern themselves, much less participate in galactic affairs." "Do they?" Thomas asked. "The Altarians developed the theoretical framework for faster-than-light communication that you use in every ship. The Vegans created the manufacturing processes that make your weapons possible. The Centaurians discovered the energy sources that power your cities." He paused, letting the implication settle. "Every species you consider inferior has contributed something essential to galactic civilization. The only difference is that you've taken credit for their innovations while denying them political representation. The chamber fell silent as the weight of this accusation settled over the assembled representatives. For centuries, the great powers had built their dominance on technologies and discoveries made by species they subsequently marginalized. And if we refuse? General Thrackmore asked, his voice carrying barely controlled violence. If we choose to maintain the current order through force? Thomas's expression grew serious, and for the first time since entering the chamber, he allowed the full weight of human determination to show. Then you will discover why Earth never makes the same mistake twice. The displays around the chamber updated to show real-time tactical information from the space battle that wasn't quite happening. Council fleets helpless and confused, human forces perfectly positioned and completely operational, and defensive networks that could turn the system into an impregnable fortress. 37 years ago, your predecessors withdrew from Earth because maintaining occupation became too costly and complicated. This time, if you choose warfare, you won't have the option of withdrawal. This time the war will end with fundamental changes to galactic civilization. You're threatening the entire established order, Counselor Lysandra observed, though her tone suggested fascination rather than condemnation. We're offering evolution instead of extinction, Thomas replied. The current system is unsustainable. It creates resentment, stifles innovation, and generates the very conflicts it claims to prevent. Change is inevitable. The only question is whether that change happens through negotiation or through the kind of war that consumes civilizations. High Chancellor Vexnari looked around the chamber, seeing the fear and uncertainty in the faces of representatives who had never imagined their authority could be challenged so comprehensively. What guarantees do we have that this new system would be any better? The same guarantee that democracy has always offered, Thomas answered. Not perfection, but accountability. Not omniscience, but the wisdom of collective decision-making. Not dominance, but justice. One by one, the representatives began to speak, some with anger, some with resignation, but increasingly with recognition that the old order was ending, whether they accepted it gracefully or not. The ethereal communion withdraws from Operation Dominion, Counselor Lysandra announced. We choose to explore this new paradigm. Other declarations followed. The Vegan Collective, the Altarian Consortium, the Centauri Alliance, our species that had been waiting generations for this moment, stepped forward to support the transformation. Even some of the great powers began to waver. Representatives who had spent their careers maintaining the status quo suddenly found themselves calculating the benefits of cooperation over continued conflict. Very well, High Chancellor Vexnari said finally, her voice carrying the weight of ages ending and beginning. The Council will consider your proposal for structural reform. Thomas smiled, and this time it was an expression of hope rather than strategy. High Chancellor, with respect, the Council as it currently exists lacks the authority to make that decision. That choice belongs to every species in the galaxy, and they'll be making it as equals. As the greatest political transformation in galactic history began to unfold, one truth became clear to everyone present. The age of imposed order was ending, and the era of chosen cooperation was about to begin. Earth, as Thomas had promised, never made the same mistake twice.